Welcome to the Reboot Chronicles, your gateway to the world's most influential leaders who are rebooting their organizations and themselves to thrive in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBias, CEO who's rebooted dozens of companies, creating billions in value. My passion is uncovering inspiring reboot stories. So buckle up, lean in, and please share this episode with a friend. It may help reboot their career and their life. I'm excited to welcome Brad Feld to unpack how entrepreneurs can win and how to navigate your own personal reboot. Brad has not just shaped the startup world, but redefined what we believe here at Reboot Chronicles are key components, like building with purpose. And like me, Brad is a bit of a Silicon Valley contrarian, often challenging conventional startup wisdom. A legendary VC, Brad co-founded Foundry Group and was an early investor in Zynga and Fitbit, also co-founded Techstars, a global accelerator that's launched countless startups and 20 unicorns with thousands of mentors like me. He's the author of several must-read books for founders, including Venture Deals, Startup Communities, and Give First. I love that he's deeply honest about his personal journey, an issue that we all deal with, including moments of burnout, mental health challenges, and conscious reboots he's made along the way, both professionally and personally. Stay with us at the end and hear about how it's possible to not only give first in an incredibly unforgiving world, but also be successful while you're doing it. Brad, good to see you.
Great to be here.
I could have gone on with your intro, but I thought I'd.
It's not delightful. I'm gonna cut that and send it to my mom.
Yeah, she would like it. I think I'm going to start with you where I usually end this show is you've been through so many things. What's been your biggest reboot challenge in your life?
Well, I've had a chronic cycle of getting completely wiped out. I don't really have a particularly good governor on my energy level and effort. And so I kind of go, full, whatever the right cliche is, full steam until I crash. And I don't do that anymore, but I went through that for many, many years, first as a founder and then as an angel investor, then as a venture investor.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a couple of major depressive episodes where I define major as lasting more than about 3 months. And then at the same time, I was having what I understand now in hindsight were essentially depressive episodes at the end of every year. And I would sort of, wander into Thanksgiving forward and I'd be all kind of whiny and tired and cranky and burnt out and down. I grew up Jewish. I didn't celebrate Christmas. So I'd kind of deflect by saying, it's Christmas. I'm not into Christmas. And, everybody's taking time off and it's not really for me. But what was really going on was I was just fundamentally exhausted.
Wow.
And it wasn't just physically exhausted, it was physiologically exhausted. So it was a combination of, the physical energy that you put into life and entrepreneurship and business, but it was also just the emotional energy, both the ups and the downs and sort of all the dynamics around it. And I would say from a reboot perspective, I had a huge experience in 2013 that was transformative in terms of how I've approached life since, which was in 2013. If you looked at things from the outside, everything was going great. Foundry was going great. Techstars was going great. So work, very strong. I mean, as a VC, I always have some companies that are messed up, but that's life as an investor.
Always. They're always in the mix.
Yeah. So like that, that's not what I'm, that's not the difference between great and not great. Great is like the overall experience is really working well. Personally, my marriage to my wife, Amy, which now is 32 years in, we've been together 35 years, was going awesome. Loving living in Boulder and being part of, the Boulder community. And I kind of out of the blue got very depressed. And it came on at the end of 2022, but by January 2023, I couldn't deny that I was in a deep depression.
Yeah.
And it lasted about 6 months. And I started in that cycle, I started doing therapy again, which I'd done in my 20s, but I had not done for quite some time, from my mid 20s to, or maybe late 20s to, at that point, I was in my early 40s. In 2023, I would have been 47, so late 40s.
Yep.
And I hadn't really dug into, as a 47-year-old, what was going on. And, I I played out patterns that were repeating over and over again that were not maybe positive from a perspective of being successful, financially successful or successful in businesses, but not personally successful, not personally happy, not internally satisfied. And, I'll just use the label depression is like that does not equate to like what I want
Right.
on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
And so that was a really profound period of time. It sort of probably lasted over about a decade. I'm about to turn 60. And I would say that the depression didn't last a decade, it lasted 6 months, but that exploration and really sort of trying hard to understand what was important to me, while still being very deeply involved in work, but modulating how I used my energy, modulating things like travel, resetting a bunch of my own expectations around what was important and what my priorities were. So that was probably when I reflect back on, the last 55 years. I mean, I've started my first 50 years. Let's say I started my first company when I was 20. And, when I was 10, 12, 13 years old, I was already interested in computers. And, so 40 years of business, I guess. That was a time period and that was a reboot that was more significant than probably any of the others, including some that were quite dramatic. I mean, the post-internet bubble time was pre-internet bubble was extraordinarily positive.
Yeah.
And, for 3 or 4 years, and then the bubble when it collapsed, which was in 12 months, was horrific. And all through that period of time, like the energy level and the effort into it was extraordinary. And even coming out of that and the changes that I made coming out of that and the rethinking of some things then, I don't think was as profound as what's happened in the last, 5+ years.
Well, yeah, it's all accelerated now, but everyone is, most of you are nodding your heads. You've been through that. You've heard it. I'm still in it right now. We go through these cycles. And if you're an entrepreneur or an investor or a coach or a board member or chairman, a lot of the roles I take on, it is, a lot of the times it's balls to the wall, as the guys like to say, and it's 7-day week kind of stuff. I find myself sometimes buried in, and then you at least have the cathartic experience or something, maybe Amy helped you to come out of that. How's it made you a better advisor, investor, board member?
Well, a couple of different things. I think
because they like you as a workaholic.
Well, sure. I'd start with, in the context of creating companies, from my frame of reference, it's super simple about who it's about and what it's about.
Yeah.
And, I presume people are familiar with the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell. And if you're not familiar with hero's journey, every movie ever made has an arc that's a hero's journey.
There you go.
Yeah, right. It goes up, it goes down. A time of increasing difficulty for our protagonist is like it's just. But that's life, by the way.
I hate that part of the movie. Just like when the companies are in that trough.
But everything. I mean, I've been involved in many, many, many companies. Plenty that have been successful. Many more that have been failures. And every company I've been involved in has had at least one near-death experience. And many of them died. But even the really successful ones had at least one near-death experience.
Right.
So my view is to start from the frame of reference that the hero of the story is the founder. Period.
I like that. I like it.
I also have come to the idea that in one's own life, whatever one does, doesn't matter what you do, you're the hero of your own story. And so in defining what your story is, if you're the hero of your own story and you accept the hero's journey has ups and downs and times of increasing difficulty for the protagonist, understanding yourself is a key starting point to being able to be successful in your own journey, whatever it is. In the context of understanding yourself as an advisor, investor, mentor, whatever label you want to put on it, if you understand yourself, you can start to be able to understand the founder, because all founders are different. there's not a thing called a founder. In the same way, there's not a thing called a VC. I mean, yeah, sure, people put a label on VCs, but there's so many different styles and approaches and types.
Yep,
and
exactly.
you can be successful with different approaches. But I think one of the things that is a disservice that the various dimensions of the industry, whatever you want to call it, whether it's the tech industry or whether it's the VC industry or whether it's
We'll go with both of those. Yeah, exactly. That's perfect.
It doesn't matter what the label is, but what ends up happening is so many people who are not the hero of the story, a la not the founder, also, number one, they don't recognize that. So they think maybe they're the hero of the founder story.
Whole nother problem, right?
Right. And it's an and clause, and they don't understand themselves. And if you don't understand yourself, I don't think you can be effective in helping others. And I shouldn't say it that black and white. You can be effective if you don't understand yourself. You can be effective.
It sure helps.
I think you can be more effective helping others if you understand yourself.
I've had a lot of unenlightened board members as a serial CEO that I care to count, and if they had followed a little of that advice, it would have been very helpful. Just like leave the room, go understand yourself before you start spouting out advice here. You just said something that triggered me. So sorry, I got to go on a tangent here.
Go for it.
And I'll let you dig into it. Failure. So when I was in Silicon Valley running companies, failure was a badge of honor. Fortunately, I didn't have a lot of them. Most of mine were, up and to the right and exit and IPOing. But when I, as you know, I'm one of the co-founders of 1871 Chicago. When I moved back 2021 to Chicago, just taken, AutoWeb public, $1 billion valuation, life is good. And I came back to a city that was essentially had totally changed. They were down on entrepreneurs. They didn't think it was a badge of honor. They thought it was a shameful thing that this internet bubble happened. And therefore, the entire, what we used to call ecosystems community was against it. Even the press was running really negative articles about how founders had just like overspent the money and totally screwed up everything. And so it was not cool to be in tech. And now, as you know, 10, 15 years later, you were back there a couple of weeks ago with me, right? So 10, 15 years later, actually it's 20, but, it's the most vibrant entrepreneurial community, I think, in the U.S. And Chicago is a place where we're starting to start more companies because it is a great give back community. But it was such a dramatic shift, but still in the Midwest, what they used to call flyover territory, is still failure is not necessarily a badge of honor. How do you deal with that failure thing, and what do you think you need to do to shift people's behavior? Because I do want the founder that's been through a couple of those to be helping us do the next startup, whether he's the CEO or not.
I think the key is a fundamental reframing of the definition, not to rationalize something away, but just to change the perspective. So I view the creation of a company and building a company as an endless series of experiments. You have a hypothesis, you run an experiment.
Yeah.
Most of the time the experiment fails. You collect data. You take that data, you create a new hypothesis, you run a new experiment. It probably fails. Collect more data. Eventually, you run an experiment that works, and then you do more of that. Although you have to keep measuring stuff because things change, and so that thing that was working might not work forever. Almost certainly won't work forever. And the experience of building an individual company is that series of experiments. Then if you step back from that, for a founder who is not, there are a few founders that are famous, well-known ones that have done one company in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But many founders don't just do one company in their lifetime. And, many successful founders have multiple successes and along the way, some failures of companies. So within those companies, lots of the things they try to do fail. And so scaling back and saying, all right, if a company is an experiment or endless series of experiments, it has lots of failure in it. You step back and say a founder's life or a founder's journey or whatever you want to put a label on it is an endless series of experiments of which many of them fail. And some of the failures of that could be the full company that is the container for a set of experiments. But that's just one container because it's just one thing. one of my favorite lines from one of my closest friends who passed a few years ago, a guy named Len Fassler, who bought my first company, and then we went on to work together. In the midst of a very successful company of ours, post-internet bubble collapsing because of the collapse of the internet bubble, public company was worth about $3 billion at the time. And, every day was just awful. And the work was awful. And it wasn't the only thing I was involved in because I was on 20 other boards or something like that because of all the venture investments I'd made. So I had a ton of shit to do. Every day was worse than the previous day. It was like one of these things where you kind of go to bed at the end of the day.
Oh,
and you're
gosh. I've been there. Yep.
Tomorrow will be better. And it's like, what's worse? And somewhere in that year, I'm like, you know what? Tomorrow's each day's going to suck more than the previous day. I'm sort of curious what comes at me. But I was really, really tired this one particular morning. I'd stayed over the night at Len's house and we were about to go have a bunch of crap that we had to deal with. And he came up to me and he said, he could see me really well. He said, "What's wrong? You don't look like you're okay this morning." And I said, and it kind of whined a little bit. "I'm so tired and this sucks." And Len was 32 years older than me. So, had the wisdom of having been through a lot more. And he just looked at me and he gave me a big hug and he said, "Brad, they can't kill you and they can't eat you. Suit up." And, I smile. How can you not smile when somebody says it to you? And I carry it around with me. It's like, look, even if the business fails, they can't kill you and they can't eat you. And that's part of the experience of the founder. So I like this idea of reframing it, which is it's not the failure of the company.
Right.
It's the individual experiment.
You gave up. Yeah. You were in the middle of an experiment process. Why'd you stop? That's what a scientist would say.
That's right.
I love that.
Right. And
I really love that.
One other piece to the reframing, I have a friend, Terry Gold, who I was on his board for 17 years, and he built a good business that made progress and grew and at various points in time was profitable. And then ultimately the market changed enough and, he cut the business down and eventually tried to sell the business, couldn't find a buyer. And after 17 years, gracefully wound the business down.
Yeah.
And we were talking, that was super hard, obviously. It wasn't with any joy that any of that happened, but it was a long journey. And at the end of it, we're talking and he says to me, where I said to him something about failure, the company failed. And he said, "Brad, I don't view the company as a failure. It was a financial failure. But, we worked for X companies. We had 1,000+ employees over the years. 100 people had babies while they were at Gold Systems. We impacted this many people with our products in a positive way." It's like, it was an experience. And, what could it have been a more financially successful experience? Yeah, that would have been nice. But the experience wasn't a quote failure. So a lot of it is just reframing how you think about what that word means. By the way, I struggle with badge of honor. I think, and labeling it as badge of honor, I think failure is just an integral part of the process. And
I was just pointing out the diametrically opposed Chicago.
Oh yeah.
Chicago versus Silicon Valley. It was ridiculous. The shift. I got on a flight and I wasn't a hero anymore.
That's this very interesting shift, and that's maybe that's the point. It's such a good way you say it. You aren't the hero anymore.
Yeah.
Of somebody else's story. Versus, again, where I started, which is you're the hero of your own story. And if you're the hero of your own story, things are not going to work. And, in the context of cultures and startup communities in different parts of the country or in the US or different parts of the world, I think it's very hard to tell people, look, failure is a badge of honor. You should be really excited about it. Instead, you step back from it and say, you know what? It's part of the process and it's part of what we're trying to do. And look at what happens over time where the success compounds and the outcomes from the success compound.
Exactly.
Whereas the failure is a single event.
It compounds if you put your faith in that person again. And, a lot of people in my example, they don't. They're like, "Oh, he's damaged goods. We're going to let them." People literally moved out of Chicago because they were like, "I got to go somewhere else." I'm like, that's not the answer. It's like your friend, your first acquirer, God bless him. If he had not taken that attitude, he could have ended up being depressed and gosh knows what. He actually took a very different mental attitude about, maybe you didn't become a serial entrepreneur, but at least you had a good attitude about when I was done, I was done. We gave it our best shot. It's almost like a mental reframing. And I found that most entrepreneurs that make it, they just keep doing that. They don't see the struggle as, oh my gosh, or whiny, like you said. It's like they just take it as the next challenge. And sometimes they run the experiment, they tweak it, they get the data, and sometimes I've done this. I interpret the data wrong. And my next experience, my experiment might not improve. But I like your compounding philosophy, because that's what it should be. But both the company and the person, really, right?
That's right.
That's right. Back to the Chicago thing. So what is the difference? And I'm jumping into your book now because you talk about it. So I was talking about a startup ecosystem. They thought they had one there, and the minute something went south, people are like, "Oh no, we don't have that." So you kind of point out, yeah, that's different than a startup / entrepreneurial community. Ecosystems and communities are two different things. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I define, this was started in my first book, Startup Communities, which I wrote came out with in 2012. I started writing in 2010.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
it was on the tail end of the financial crisis. And even in 2010, on the tail end of the financial crisis, entrepreneurship was still seriously in the doldrums in many parts of the world. And there were some places where it was starting to have signs of life again, and enthusiasm. And the thing that prompted me to start working on startup communities was an article that someone wrote that said, if you're looking forward to the future of economies around the world, and you really want to talk about how those economies grow, you have to look to innovation, and innovation needs to be a critical part of it. And here's 4 places to look at, and 4 cities to look at. And the 4 cities were Silicon Valley, which is not a city, but a whole bunch of cities.
Right.
New York, which is, again, 5 cities. Boston, which the Boston metro area is a bunch of cities. So when people say Boston, they often mean Boston, Cambridge, Newton, Waltham, surrounding areas. And Boulder.
Yeah.
And, when I read that article, I'm like, one of these things is not like the other 3, because Boulder is only 100,000 people. It's a little tiny thing.
Tiny. Yeah.
And so I started using that as the process for exploring this. Ultimately, I've defined 2 different constructs, and they're very deliberate. One is a startup community, and a startup community has one goal and one goal only. That's it. One goal: help founders succeed.
Amen.
That's it.
Yeah.
And the key dynamic in the startup community is that it's by and for founders. And so in that first book, I created this construct called leaders, which I said need to be entrepreneurs, and feeders, which is everyone else. I made a mistake in that first book. I didn't give voice to a bunch of people who work for organizations that are feeders. That would be university, government,
that's all right.
Large companies.
You got to pass on that one. Yeah.
That's all right. But I eventually started calling those people instigators.
Right.
And so the idea was, in the startup community, the leaders have to be founders or instigators. And then the feeders are the organizations. The feeders can't be the leaders.
No.
They're supporters.
Right.
And so that's the startup community. Then you have this entrepreneurial ecosystem, and in it, the actors are primarily the feeders, the organizations, university, et cetera, government. And interestingly, all those organizations can play a role in helping the startup community be successful, helping founders be successful. But if you said to any of those organizations, is your only job, any leader of those companies, CEO of a company or president of a chancellor of university,
right,
is your only job to help founders succeed?
No.
They'd look at you, what are you talking about? Right. And so it was a way of separating.
Not even on the top 10 list.
Right. But it's one of the things on the list.
Yep.
Right. And every university today is doing entrepreneurship related stuff. It's now embedded within the fabric of the way universities think. Most large companies have innovation centers that are really vibrant, that support entrepreneurs. And a lot of times, in Chicago, it's a great example. The event that I was at 1871 in the Accenture headquarters, like Accenture doing things to support the startup community in Chicago through the activities that they're doing. So it's not the only thing Accenture does, but it's a thing. And so this concept became very powerful because it led to a premise I had that every city in the world with at least 50 to 100,000 people should have a startup community. And when somebody said, well, we're too small, or, we don't have enough this, or we don't have enough investors, or we don't have enough government support, or we don't have a big company here, or we don't have a university, the answer is doesn't matter. The startup community simply exists to help founders succeed. You don't need those things to help founders succeed. They add, but they're not the things that are needed.
No, you need people, and people that want to do favors and give back. And like you say in your new book, Give First, it's like give without expectation. Tell us about that, by the way. What's the, that doesn't sound like a VC mantra to me.
Well, let me quickly define Give First because it's important.
Yeah, sorry.
To that answer. Well, that doesn't sound like a VC, but I'll give you a good joke to play around with. Give First evolved from that first Startup Communities book. I had a very small section in it called one paragraph called Give Before You Get. And I hadn't really thought very hard about it. It was just an offhand comment. And it was an offhand comment in the context of, if you want to get the energy going in the startup community, the flywheel going, you need to have all the founders need to be willing to put energy into the system without defining upfront what they're going to get back. It's not altruism. You expect to get something back. You just don't know when, from whom, over what time period, and what for.
Ah, all right. That's a good differentiator.
Right?
I like that.
It's a cousin to pay it forward. Pay it forward is transactional. Somebody once did something for me. Now I'm going to pay it forward. This is not that. This is, you know what? I want this thing to, I'm going to engage with the thing. I don't know where it's going to go. We'll see where it goes. Interestingly, as that evolved, that became the mantra at Techstars.
Foundry Group.
Hashtag Give Before You Get is not a particularly good hashtag. So a guy named Greg Cochran at Techstars.
You could interpret that many ways.
Yeah. Well, we only have 140 characters, so why use so many of them? And Greg ended up hashtag Give First on some Techstars post, and all of a sudden it was used all the time. Give First is a philosophy, not a religion. The difference is a religion has a bunch of rules, and if you follow the rules, good things happen to you in the afterlife, or whatever you believe happens in the context of a religious tradition. And there's lots of different religious traditions, so it doesn't matter what your religious tradition is, but a set of rules. Philosophy is a set of ideas to incorporate into the way you do things. And so for me, I was defining with Give First a philosophy that I've used for the last, 25 to 30 years, probably longer, at least going back to 1990, so maybe 35 years, in the way I've acted as a founder and investor and somebody who's been very involved in a handful of startup communities, Boston, Colorado, in Boulder, in Denver, and then others. And interestingly, when I think about that in the context of the VC comment, yes, people do say to me, "Oh, you're that Give First VC. Why don't you give me $5 million? And after I'm successful, I'll give you back something that I think don't worry about it." I'm like, no. I got transactional stuff in my life. I'm not saying 100% of your life needs to be non-transactional. I'm suggesting that if you're willing to put energy into systems in a non-transactional way, some magical things can come out of it. And part of this book, Give First, which is subtitled The Power of Mentorship, I talk about how mentorship and the engagement around being willing to essentially give first, not just into individual systems, but with people, with companies, has paid off in very substantial ways, even for me. One of the important parts of mentorship is to tell people examples from your own story. Mentorship is not, "Hey, Dean, you should do this."
Yeah.
Right? For all the people out there that are listening, and if you're watching, you see me pointing, wagging my finger. Like when somebody wags their finger at me, the first thing I think of is I'm going to do exactly the opposite.
Exactly.
Like I'm not going to do that. I'm doing 180 degrees from that.
They think of their parents too. That's not a good mentor relationship.
I mean, my father says, "Brad, you should," and I'm like, "Dad, go away, leave me alone." Like I may not say it out loud, but I certainly think it now. As a almost 60-year-old, I'll say it out loud to him. "Dad, stop it." But this idea that you're saying, hey, Dean, the thing you're describing, from my experience, here's what happened. And here's, what I did. Like being able to do that as part of the mentorship dynamic is an essential part of Give First, which is you're going to go do whatever you do. All I'm doing is providing you some data. And if that data is my own experience, then that data has some validity, has more validity. If I say to you, hey, Dean, you should do this, I'm not being very helpful to you, number one.
Right.
And number two, if you do something else, it's created this weird, contrasting relationship as a mentor versus mentee. Now, if I'm your boss and it's a hierarchy, that's different. But in a startup community, in most of the early entrepreneurial activity, in many other systems, not just startup related systems, this idea of engaging with somebody else and engaging in a way where you, as even the mentor, are open-minded to learning versus showing up believing you know the answer. I've been through a lot of stuff. I don't know the answer to everything. It's an unfortunate kind of leadership that's being modeled in over long periods of time in lots of different ways, where the leader has to have the answer.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of the time, the leader's wrong.
It started way back in the industrial age, by the way.
No, I mean, it started at the beginning of human beings. Like, it's not
exactly.
a new idea.
It just got perfected
Right?
in business. Yeah.
Any leader who thinks they are always right,
Yeah.
from my frame of reference, they're way less effective than they could be.
As a mentor coach, you're making me think about this. I actually get more out of it with some conversations than they get on a certain day. And I've done, like you, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, and not always mentoring, but sometimes, there's a difference between mentoring and coaching and all that stuff. But what's the biggest gift you've actually, or surprise that you did get back that you never expected?
Well, two parts to that. One is you just described the magic trick of mentoring. The magic trick of mentoring is when the one up, one down, the mentor-mentee relationship becomes a peer relationship. Somebody says, well, why do you mentor? What do you get out of it? And there's a long list of things, but one of them is I learn shit.
Exactly.
I get exposed to new things I haven't had to deal with before, and I hear what other people think about them.
I've been mentoring a government quantum team for years. I've learned more than I ever would have about quantum computing. My gosh.
Now that we're getting old, like, hey, old 60-year-old, like, I will tell you that when I sit with a 23-year-old, I learn way more from the 23-year-old than that 23-year-old learns from me if I'm willing to listen. Because there's a whole bunch of stuff that person's thinking about in a totally different way than the last 40 years of my, as much as I've been able to change and do things and evolve my own thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, all of a sudden there's a new frame of reference. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean that I am now subordinate to them. It's just this peer relationship's magical. And I had that happen with Len Fassler when I was in my early 30s. And I remember it. He was in his mid 60s, and I remember the moment it happened. I remember
you were lucky. You had a good mentor.
No, it was just like, wow, I got it. This is the magic trick. So that's piece one. Second, what are things that have happened? I'll give two examples here that are fun ones. One that's a classic that's in a book, in the Give First book, and one that happened literally this morning. So in the Give First book, I talked about the story of the creation of Techstars. And the story of the creation of Techstars is an example of this, where I had gotten to the place in Boulder in early, sort of post-internet bubble, but maybe 2 or 3 years before Techstars got started, 2004, 2005.
Six.
Where I was, I was very, very visible nationally as an investor. Because I invested all over the country. I traveled a lot, had a lot of portfolio companies, and I was known that I lived in Boulder. So I was kind of a little bit of a weird cat for, like, he's the guy in Boulder doing all this stuff. So what was happening was anytime anybody was either connected to or coming through Boulder that had anything to do with startups, I'd get an email. Can you get together for coffee? Can you get together for a meal? Coming through town for a wedding? Can we get together? And basically, if I said yes to all of that, all I'd ever do is have coffee and go to the bathroom. Like, there was just be no time to do anything.
Right.
And so I came up with this construct I called Random Day, where once a month I did 15-minute meetings with anyone who wanted to meet with me. And I created a little simple online calendar, probably again 2003, 2004 kind of website crap. And I would do 10 to 20 meetings once a month, 15 minutes apart, or 15 minutes at a shot. And I ended up over time, I developed 2 goals from the meetings. At first, I didn't have any goals other than just not have meetings all the time. And the goals were, number 1, learn one thing from the meeting. Goal 2, help the person I'm meeting with in one way.
I like it.
That's it.
That's it.
And that was a successful 15-minute meeting for me. And people would sit down with me. I'd say, hey, next 15 minutes of my life belong to you. Where do you want to go?
What happened today?
Well, but so how Techstars got started was on a Random Day meeting. David Cohen.
Oh, that's right. You and David. Yeah.
And I didn't know David. He knew of me, but we never crossed paths before. And the funding for Techstars and the catalyst to create it came from that Random Day meeting. And again, I tell the whole story in the Give First book. So to the extent anybody's interested in it, that's a good. Brad, the book salesman, is now trying to sell you a book. The thing that happened today was I was at the annual event for an organization called Access Mode. Access Mode was started about 4 years ago, coming out of COVID by 2 people, Zanetta and Kevin. Zanetta had been a very successful person in corporate world in tech. Kevin had been a multi-time successful entrepreneur. They're living in Denver. And coming out of COVID, what they were feeling was a lack of focus on underrepresented founders in the Front Range, which is a classical problem that still exists all around the U.S., regardless of whether our current administration is able to or willing to use that language. And they started an organization to help essentially run an accelerator type program for underrepresented founders. Wendy Lee, who ran Energize Colorado, which was an organization that she and I co-founded during COVID. And during COVID, we were, I think, the largest deployer of capital in any state to very small.
You were the only guys working, if I remember right.
Yeah, we're a business under companies with 25 employees or less. We distribute about $42 million to those types of organizations in Colorado. Hugely successful program. And Wendy ended up, evolving Energize Colorado from there quite substantially. She had met Zanetta and Kevin, and she said, Brad, you got to talk to these folks. We do a call. They describe what they want to do. Of course, I know what an accelerator is because of Techstars. I understood and agreed with the premise they had. And they were just kind of getting started. They had a plan. They're trying to raise some money. And I said, look, here's $50K. First call, here's $50K. I don't have any idea where it goes. Don't really care if it's, I care that I hope it's successful, but there's no strings attached. Go. And so I was their first check. And this morning at the event, we had a great event. It was really pretty awesome. We celebrated a bunch of the founders that went through the most recent cohort and program. Oh, by the way, they went through Techstars. So as a nonprofit, we had them go through Techstars so that they could get some acceleration from that. But the end result of it is Zanetta's up on stage talking about, at the end of it, talking about the origin story. And she described her version of what I just said. And she said, look, it's basically Brad living his way of being. He gave first. He didn't ask us to do a bunch of stuff. He didn't ask us to prove ourselves. He accepted our hypothesis, and he wanted to be immediately effective in helping us explore our hypothesis. And Brad was totally comfortable and willing for it not to work. Why did I do that? Wendy asked me to. It overlapped with things I cared about. It was in my startup community where I wanted to help founders succeed. Like, there are a whole bunch of reasons why I'd engage with it.
Right.
But again, the approach philosophically is, you know what? Let's go. Let's see where it goes. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We learned something. Let's figure out what we learned from it. If it does work, awesome. Let's keep doing more of it.
Thanks for joining us, Brad. You've been listening to Brad Feld on the Reboot Chronicles. Please like, subscribe, and watch us wherever you get podcasts or at rebootchronicles.com.